Tonight's shiur is actually shiur number 14 of the Kosher Kitchen series. I made a typo on the source sheet. I just noticed it right now. I was slashing in my kitchen. It should be splashing in my kitchen. That's what happens when you do things very late at night. So I apologize. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the scenario of tonight's topic, and we're actually going to read it in the Shulchan Aruch tonight, because it's a very clear and specific case. I'm going to throw out the scenario and see what you guys would do. Maybe you'd be like, I'd scream and throw everything in the garbage. Maybe, I have no idea. And then we're going to take it apart bit by bit. Okay, so let's understand the scenario. The scenario is the following: you are cooking a fleishik dish, chicken soup, stew, wherever the case may be, on your element, on your stovetop, and milk comes and flies across and hits your pot. The stew is hot, everything is cooking, the fire's going, it's on the element. What do you do? The outside of the pot. Right. So what do you do? What's your inclination? What would you consider? What are you thinking here?
If it had gone in the soup and it was just a small splash, then it would be less of a shishu.
I mean, you'd say, well, just a little bit fell on the inside, maybe, perhaps, was a shishu, and therefore, what about the outside?
I'd probably.
I think that maybe you might be able to apply some sort of rule in that sense that it's such a small splash on this pot.
Oh, you're saying, so you're even more so with the lenient, right? Okay, no. But that's good. I like that, because what are you saying? Well, imagine, let's take the worst case scenario, a worse scenario, and that is that milk going inside the pot. So maybe if it's outside the pot, well, I have a better chance of nullifying that, because I'm taking into consideration not just the stew, not just the food, but also the pot in terms of combating it with 60. Great, that to me, that's good. Anyone? What do you think?
I think I would transfer the soup into another pot. I would put the pot away to maybe kosher it.
Oh, you think even if, okay, so your reaction is, what about the actual pot? What about the food in the pot? You can save it by emptying the content.
I think it didn't hit the soup. And
so it didn't hit the soup, so it's okay.
Right. But there's something that's telling me that there's something more with if it hits the pot while it's hot than there would be with actual food.
Actual food inside. Okay. Well, let's find out what happens.
It depends what the outside of the pot is made of.
Yeah.
Let's assume it's like a metal pot. Right. You're cooking a metal pot, right?
Like coating on the outside,
right?
Or as opposed to glass.
Well, here's the problem. You're not going to put glass on an element. I mean, that's
right.
not smart. Even I know that. I'm a male. Right.
But how is it on the outside affect the food on the inside?
Oh, what a great, Ms. Marcus said, I don't understand. What's the problem? Like, what are you talking about? The food's inside. The pot is outside. How is there transfer from the pot inside? Great. That's a good question. Oh, maybe there's a problem with the pot. Maybe my food would be okay. Okay.
I would take the food out.
Okay, where I take the food out. Okay, so we have to understand here, what is the relationship between the content and the pot?
Outside of the pot, you're saying.
Right, the outside of the pot. Okay, good. Right, outside of the pot. No, it's outside of the pot. Let's take a look. So this actually is a case. We're reading from Shulchan Aruch. If you take it to the top of the page, it's in your Adea, Hilchos Basar V'Chalav Siman Tzadik Beis. Seif Hey. Tipas Chalav Shenafla Al Hakadera She'etzel Ha'esh Mibachutz. So everyone see why this is our case? It's a drop of milk that splashes on a pot which is on the fire from the outside. Okay? So basically it's our case. Here we go. Listen to this. Let's start with the first distinction in the Shulchan Aruch. Im nafla keneged hatafshil, in sarich elashishim keneged hatipa, shemifa'pa'as lifnim. The distinction in the Shulchan Aruch is, wait a second, it's going to matter if it's above or below the food line. So if I have a pot which is on the stovetop, on an element, and let's say, right, the food's not coming to the top, right, that would not be very smart, it'll boil over, right, when you put a spoon in, whatever, so it's only up to here, only up to this point. The first question the Shulchan Aruch says, where is the splash? If the splash is by the food line, under the food line, then how do I view it? What does it say? you need 60 against the splash, 60 against the milk. Why? Shulchan Aruch says, Shemifapa'as lifnim, it spreads to inside. It's as if it didn't hit the side of the pot. It's as if it went inside the food itself. So therefore, let's say it's a splash. It's 10 milliliters of milk, and if I have 10 milliliters of milk, then hitting the pot, well, I look at it as a pot food entity, and therefore I'm more likely to have it nullified. Why am I more likely to have it nullified? Because now I don't just have the food content, but I also have the pot itself that can come perhaps and go against the help me with my shishim. Okay? Or so if I have 60 times the splash of the food, it appears we're going to be okay.
Dealing with that.
Let me just the people just walked in. Sorry, we have two presents today. It's okay. We have actually a Hebrew source sheet, and more importantly, we have a JLIC sticky pad. So there you go. We just started 30 seconds ago. Our case is milk splashed on a pot that was cooking on the element. Go ahead. Sorry.
The problem with dealing with like a splash,
yes,
in terms of measuring it,
yes,
it's not like you're taking a sticker and you're saying this is it. Like once something splashes and it's hot, you're taking a scenario like you don't catch it in time. Who knows where it's dripping? Who knows where it's it's not.
Right.
A splash is not like you can contain it.
So let's say So I think what the Hillel is saying is very good. Meaning, what we're saying is that if I have milk and it splashes onto a pot that's cooking meat, a meat mixture, and the splash is below the food line, meaning on outside of the pot. So milk comes and hits this pot, which is on an element. The Shulchan Aruch writes that it's as if the splash isn't on the pot, it's as if the splash is inside the pot, because it goes through, it's a mefapea, and it's as if it's inside the tavsho. So therefore you need 60 times, question is about the pot. Let's assume you can't count the pot for now, actually. You need 60 times the splash inside your pot. Forget the pot. Okay? So again, because it's hot, it goes right through, and it's below the food line, so it's as if the splash went inside your food, and you need 60 times the milk. Now again, you have a splash, chances are you're going to have 60 times. What?
It is going to be, like...
So again, in theory, let's say it hits here. Let's say it hits up here.
Then it's liquid then.
You're saying it then goes down.
It's inevitably gonna hit the pot.
So we're gonna see so it could be the first shot, like the first strike above or below the food line. Now, what about if it's above the food line? Do you think there's room to be more lenient or more strict, and why? Why?
There's no food there, so you can't call for substitution because you're not. If you were saying it before that now you have the food and the pot count at the top, you only have. Let's forget
I should have thrown the word pot there. It was a mistake.
So
yeah.
You have nothing to count by.
What am I supposed to do now? So it appears that if the milk should hit above the food line, we're potentially entering in a much greater danger zone. Why? Because it's not. Maybe you can't have it 60 times against the food. There's something about this pot. Maybe this pot has become non-kosher. And the chances of having, we'll see exactly what we got to take into account, what we can do, but we can already feel that it's going to be much more strict, and we're going to see that in Shulchan Aruch. Okay? The language of Shulchan Aruch is, where am I? One. So it's the Sif Hey, 1, 2, second line there, after the period, about 2/3 of the way down the line. V'im nafla b'makom harekan, if it hits on the empty side, i.e. above the food line, v'hi mefapas b'dofen hakdera, it's now spreading throughout the walls of this pot, ad samuch l'rotev, until the sauce, until the food. So the kolkach she'ein shishi geneged tipa, potentially you might not have 60 times against this drop. Why? Because you have to measure it against the pot. Hare nesar osu makam akdera. That spot on the pot is now not kosher because it's a fleshik pot. So now you have a black hole, so to speak, in this pot. V'im yaret tavsho derech malka makadera, and if you were to pour the pot over that spot on the pot, you're not going to have 60 times your content on that spot. There's no way, right? Again, you have a spot over here, which is, so to speak, a black mark. You're pouring content over it. All that content is going to touch the non-kosher part of the pot, and you're going to be in trouble. In fact, jump to the next siman Shulchan Aruch, because that's a bit of a leniency, believe it or not, and says the Shulchan Aruch, Nagu ha'olam le'aser shenafla ala dofen shelo keneged arota. So this, like black X and mark, says the Shulchan Aruch, we do not hold that way. Should your milk splash above the food line, you're in big trouble. Okay, and then there's a bit of a caveat there that if it hits a place where there's direct heat, maybe it would burn it. So we are going to see a distinction between above the food line and below the food line. I think what the Hillel said is very important, and that is, well, what about where it drips down? Because it's true, liquid isn't static. It just hit the pot and like disappear. So it appears, where's that first shot? Where's the first arrow striking? Is that above or below? Let's take a look now at the English or English sources and go through the scenario. We're on page 138. Okay. At the bottom, determine the food line, the number 60. Determining where the milk hit, below or above the food line, will ultimately make all the difference in deciding the status of the meaty pot and its contents when milk splash on it from the outside. Another significant factor to consider is the measurement or nullifying the forbidden taste. The number 60 generally tells us that if there are 60 times the amount of kosher food against non-kosher food, the non-kosher food is negated and the mixture can be eaten. We've mentioned that many times. That's me commenting. However, depending on if the drop fell below the food line or above the food line, will determine if the amount necessary to negate the milk that's splattered onto the meaty pot in our case will be 60 times the drop, or it's possible that 60 times 60, 3,600 times the drop will be necessary. I'll explain that, and so will the article. Take a look. Below the food line, above the food line. Let's go to below the food line first. If the drop fell below the food line, all that is needed is 60 against the drop, and the food is permitted. We read that in the Shulchan Aruch black and white before. 60 is needed against the drop. Why? Because we suspect that the taste, the blios, right, the taste of the drop will be absorbed in the walls of the pot and continue to go through the walls of the pot into the food. It's exactly what we read. Great, wonderful.
Actually, what happens? The food taste goes through the pot?
You're saying actually from a chemistry perspective. If it's metal, metal's a conductor, and metal will allow taste to pass through it. What will be very interesting, what about if it's an 8-inch... Here's the issue. We know that there has to be a way to have it conduct through it because food cooks inside of a pot. So just like, this is a hot pot. It's not a cold pot, right? So if it's a hot pot, there has to be some type of cooking going on inside this pot because I'm cooking. So therefore, the walls of the pot have to be...
Well, I'm assuming
allowed to go through.
If the taste can go out, then it could also go in. Like, I'm thinking of how I would cook on, like, how you would cook on the stove. If you're cooking something for a long time, something liquid, and it condenses outside, you will have
a condensation
outside of the pot. So I'm assuming the opposite can
Also,
happen.
I would say, like,
UFC engineering is now speaking.
A small drop, like, if you really think about it, like, maybe the taste, if you took a spoonful of that spot, you might not taste the milk. But on a microscopic level, the milk is passing through the pot, and then if you take a piece at the other side of the pot, at a hot pot, then you took it under a magnifying glass, you might find a particle of milk there. So,
right.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
If you have a hot enough pot, then it
would pass through a conductor.
So,
no, you're right. Look, again, remember, if it's such a small amount of a splash, it's going to be nullified because, again, it's going to be such a small amount passing through. What's interesting, the halacha doesn't take into consideration, though, how much of that doesn't make it through the pot, how much of it evaporates outside the pot, right? I can't imagine, scientifically, that every molecule that gets splashed outside will make it inside. But the halacha doesn't take into consideration what disappears through whatever. Yeah. So, okay. You see it says above the food line in those two paragraphs? I'm not even going to read that because it's not the halacha. So let's go to what the halacha, the strict custom. However, all this is on the basic law. The Machaber says that if the drop falls opposite the part above the food line, right? So let's take our scenario. Here's our meat. Here's the milk. Bam, above the food line. Look what happens. The minhag is to prohibit the food even if it is not poured out, meaning even though I didn't have the food escape, unless there's 60 times 60, meaning 3,600 times that splash inside my pot. Now that, by the way, could happen, right? If it's really a small amount of milk, 36, and a large part of chicken soup, like one of those things my wife uses for like Pesach, right? So it's not so crazy that you'd have 3,600 times the splash. Now, I can't imagine there'd be a scenario, it could happen, where like half a bag of milk, having a splash, it's not going to happen in a home, right? So likely. If there's going to be a splash, it probably will be a small amount. So, again, talking about a realistic scenario here, it's very possible you would even have 3,600 times that amount. Okay, the Shach and the Taz both explain the reason for this custom is because we are concerned that perhaps some gravy, or rotev, will touch the area above the food line without us noticing it, either when it is boiling on the fire or when one attempts to pour it out the other side. And if there is not 60 times 60 to nullify it, everything would become asur. Okay, turn the page, please. Therefore, top of the page, if the drop falls below the food line, right below the food line, the custom is to pour the food out immediately. However, in the case where the drop falls above the food line, everything is asur, and that's for 60 times 60. So the Hillel actually mentioned about pouring out the food, and that's in fact what you should do. So, in the event your milk hits your fleshik pot below the food line, chances are it's going to be permissible. Chances are you'll have shishim in there, right? It's unlikely you're not going to have shishim in a pot. It could happen. If you have shishim, you take it, and you should try, ideally, to pour the content out the opposite side that it hit. So if it hit on this side, you should pour it out that way. Okay? We'll talk about the pot and the status of your pot. But remember the rule, even though this is counterintuitive in the modern era, Chazal cared more about your food than your pots. Right? They're much more likely to say your food is permissible, but your pot you have to kosher. Right? Even though today, chances are your pot might be worth more than your food, or it's a big pain in the neck to get on their pot, even though we live in an affluent society. That's because they care about, meaning, right, food is more expensive. Again, meaning, I'll tell you the difference. Kosher your pot, what's the big deal? If your food you can't kosher food, right? So if it's batel, it's batel. Oh, by the way, go kosher your pot. It wasn't considered the biggest deal. Today, you don't kosher pot. You're going to throw in the garbage. Just not such a big, I guess you could kosher your pot, but it might be easier to go and buy a new one.
If it is 60 times 60 or whatever the situation is, you should still kosher your pot.
Oh, well, I didn't say that yet. We'll get there. Good question. We'll see it in a second. Now, there is a leniency that I want to show you. Okay, turn the page, please. Here we go. On page 141, it says the Mechaber. The Mechaber, under extenuating circumstances. Take a look, please. I want to show you this inside. Go back to our handout. Sif Zayin. Yesh misha matir b'shas adchak. There are those who permit, in a situation where it's Erev Shabbos, kagon b'Erev Shabbos, afilu shelo k'neged harotev. If you were to have your milk splash above the food line, below the food line, chances are you're going to be okay. But even above the food line, there is room to be lenient. Because remember, we're only worried that maybe a little bit of sauce will come in contact with it. But really, mikara din, you could even argue that how's it really going to affect the rest of my pot, the rest of my content of my food. So,
you still pour the food out.
Yeah, you still pour the food out. You should definitely try to pour the food out. There's no question about it. Yeah. So, back to our packet here. Mechaber writes, under extenuating circumstances, or in the case where it is necessary for Shabbos, we can permit the food if there was only 60 times against the drop. The Shach, which I brought for you too, says that if it's possible, one should let the pot cool before pouring out the food, but he allows you to pour the soup out, again the soup or whatever the content is, doesn't matter, from the opposite side where the milk splashed in a situation where there's no time to wait for it to cool. So if you're in a situation where it's this time of year, it's 7:45, it's 7:30, Shabbos is in a few minutes, what are you going to do? You'd be allowed, even bizman hazeh, quote unquote, in an affluent society, you would not have to throw out the food. You'd be allowed to just pour it out on the other side, and you would not have to wait for it to cool, which could take, more time. Therefore, you're allowed to pour out the pot. Okay, this is the Rabbi. I told you they do a scenario here, which I try to skip because they would just waste time. Therefore, you're allowed to pour out the sudla. You did besides. Even if you poured it out on the side where the splash of milk hit the meaty pot, the Gra and the Shochan would matter it in the case where it's Erev Shabbos, and it would be inconvenient, and maybe, the guests would be very upset because they need that chicken soup on Erev Shabbos. Okay, so that's the situation. Now, what about the pot? Turn the page, please. We haven't talked about the pot. 142. Here we go. Bad news. You got to kosher the pot. Take a look. Damage control. The Taz, halfway down on 142. The Taz says that in essence, mikaradin, the pot is kosher and permitted if the drop fell below the food line. The drop either spreads into the food or stays in the walls. Since it did not come out the first time, we assume it will not come out the next time either. However, lechatchila is to treat the pot as if it's not kosher, just to avoid suspicion from Maris Ayin, and you should really kosher the pot. And the Shach holds the mamish, the pot isn't kosher, even in the event that the drop fell opposite the rotev and spread into the food or the pot. We suspect that maybe something is left behind the next time you cook. So really, even if it fell below the food line, the food might be kosher, but you should really kosher your pot, and that is in fact the halacha. Your food is okay, your pot you really should kosher, and that's in fact what we hold. And again, it's Erev Shabbos. I don't care. You have your food. Kosher your pot, Motzei Shabbos. So Chazal felt they could be strict with your pot because you could save it, because it wasn't an economic loss, because just kosher your pot and then you'll be okay. So it's a time loss. They didn't look at it as an economic loss, and therefore they felt kosher your pot no matter what. Okay?
Koshering it how?
How do you kosher your pot?
With boiling water.
With boiling water.
But doesn't that spread the milk?
No, so what we say is...
Is that the same as having soup in the pot?
Well, no. So here's...
You have to clean it first, too.
Right, so you have to wait, first of all, you have to wait 24 hours. You can't kosher anything in 24 hours. So that's a good question, but remember what we say. If there's something boiling over here, this kind of works. Pretend this pot is bigger than this pot. You know the exact size. So this is not kosher. It's boiling pot, and I put it in here. I allow the water in here to boil over it. So what am I doing? It's expunging out all the chazarai, and boiling, and all that chazarai is now in this water that I pour out. So I've kind of had the treif expelled from here into the water. Get rid of the water, then it's all good. There are those who will only kosher things and will dedicate a koshering kli. Not flesheks, not parv, not nothing, but a koshering kli, which is ideal. The truth is, they even talk about, this is a crazy scenario, you even see in halacha, you actually could maybe kosher using milk. Boil milk up, even though flesheks milcheks, boiling milk, just pour it out. We don't, we only use water. Yeah, but there are those, in theory, you could probably even use milk. That's the weirdest thing, right? But if it's boiling and nothing's absorbing...
We throw out our pot if that happens.
Yeah,
we don't go through koshering.
Yeah, most people today, the tircha that it takes to kosher something properly, it's a big mess.
It's like
a
$5
splash.
pot.
Right. So, okay. Sometimes for the husband, it's worth it to kosher than to tell his wife what he did. I would say 9 times out of 10 is the guy who's sheepishly calling me, oh, why messed, Yeah. Like today at dinner, Miriam's like, why is there a milchik spoon on the table while we're eating chicken? Of course, I didn't notice it, but the rabbi doesn't notice, but the wife notices. That's what happens. Okay, there's something else that we can do, which is actually a pretty neat case, and you're going to appreciate this really a lot. 143 in the middle. If the pot is boiling. So here we go. I have a case now where I have a boiling pot on the elements. There is ze'ah. Ze'ah is steam. And in the pot, the whole pot is treated as one solid mass, according to the Ramah. Meaning, if I have a boiling pot and my pot is covered with a lid, and now I have milk splashing, same scenario as before, on my pot. So you could argue there's no such thing as above and below the food line. Why? Because when you have, let's use chicken soup as our example, chicken soup which is boiling on an element, what's happening? Steam is rising and hitting the pot and coming back down, and it's totally engulfed in. So that creates a situation where it's as if the entire pot is, shall we say, full. And therefore there's no such thing as above the food line. Right? So you wouldn't have to, so again, there's much room to be lenient in such a scenario because you could include your entire pot in there, which makes sense because of the steam. Okay? That's if it's covered. You want to see that inside? Take a look at Sif Ches at the bottom. Machvas shel chalav shenasinu b'kedera tachas kedera shel basar hazeya ola v'nivla b'kedera v'osra. I want to show you. Oh, here. Here. Go 2 lines from the bottom in Sif Ches. V'im ken hamachvas mechusa. If this machvas, if this pan, if this pot is covered, hakol shari. Everything is permitted. Again, because what's the assumption is that you get to use everything, and therefore it's much more likely to be nullified. Okay.
This is in terms of just saving your food.
That will save your food, right? Exactly. The pot Till makes a very good point. The pot we still want you to kosher the pot. Yes. However, even though I read you the Ramah, the Taz, in the name of the Rashal, disagrees with the Ramah. He says that steam has different qualities than gravy, which, by the way, I understand too. Steam is steam, gravy is gravy. Meaning, steam, it's true, things are spreading up and down, but it's not really the same. It's not the same density as gravy, which actually literally sits on the side of the pot to absorb the food to nullify it. For example, gravy is always touching the pot, but steam is not, constantly just rising and falling. Therefore, the Taz is strict. If the forbidden matter is a doraisa, then 60 times 60 are needed. If it's an isra d'Rabbanan, we are lenient, and we could only rely on the opinion that only 60 is needed. What do we mean by if it's an isra d'Rabbanan? Okay, so that's what most people think. Chicken and milk. The problem is, if you look at footnote 13, chicken soup and milk is probably treated on level of doraisa. Probably, but not for sure, because chicken is upgraded. What would be an example of a d'Rabbanan and not a d'oraisa in this case by milk? Let's say you have a
let's say you're cooking. What if you're cutting onion with a fleshig knife? The onion all of a sudden becomes fleshig, and that's what you're cooking on the stove.
Okay, that's right. That's really not a sense tam of fleshigs. Yeah, that wouldn't even be d'Rabbanan maybe. We're talking about like a d'Rabbanan mixture. So it could be if you have a something which is not kosher, only d'Rabbanan. Trying to think of a likely scenario what he's referring to here. Safek demai, safek shvis of chutz haaretz, all the things are only also d'Rabbanan. My gut reaction was to say chicken too until I saw the footnote. Okay, let's come up with what would be a d'Rabbanan splash. Maybe something that really has very little amount of dairy in it, of some sort. Maybe a tough show. Maybe that could be almost like a meaty dish that's not real meat. Almost like who was saying, almost like it has onions in it that are fleshig. It's not the same as real meat. We only treat it like meat. It's a different level than regular meat. But anyways, you'll see which one.
It could be like, what if you had like some soy milks or something, mm-hmm. Not completely like milks that are not completely. I know.
Right, but it's DE. You're saying dairy equipment, that really wouldn't be a problem. That's
no, not dairy equipment, but some that actually have like
less than 2%.
Very small percent of dairy.
You're saying the percent of dairy is so small. Right, you could say that. Is that really? Right. So I'll tell you what we do say. You're not allowed to nullify something. And the halacha is, we've come across with imavartim isur l'chitchil. You can't create a situation, meaning you're not allowed to say to yourself, oh, I'll add a little bit of milk to my stew, it's bata b'shishim. You can't do that intentionally, right? So maybe one could argue, I'm putting in some type of soy product that is it's milchik, but it's such a small percentage of milk, and that's what goes into my pot. So that would be
But
the...
anything, if you're cooking almost anything in a fleshik pot, I mean, I guess it's different opinions, but I know that we hold in my house that it's considered fleshik.
Right. If
you're cooking something like that, that would be anything not past that, I don't think. Like, we wouldn't wait 6 hours after it.
But
past
in a fleshik pot.
Eat it with milk.
No, that you can't eat that with milk, right?
Right. So, like, these things are the same thing. It's like you can't eat it.
Right. So you're saying if the water that you boiled in a fleshik pot hits a milchik thing, you're not going to say the Rabbanan is also. For sure, it's okay. Right? Okay. If I just use, let's say I have water.
Rabbi, you still need a kosher pot.
No, right. Well, it's probably noti and tam, you probably wouldn't have to kosher pot because you don't feel fleshiks in the water.
But if anything's in the water.
If there's in the water, that could be careful with the fleshiks. But anyways, you'll see why it's not really going to matter because the Darchei Tshuva cites different opinions against the rabbinic authorities that agree or disagree with the Ramah, and he concludes that if milk fell on top of a pot of meat while it's cooking, you should really be strict, and anyways, do 60 times 60, since cooking milk together with meat is an Isser de Oraisa. And in fact, we are more often than not machmir on this in this scenario. So we will not treat a pot covered as more lenient. What you could do is, though, you could pile up leniencies, meaning, I don't know if it hit above or below the pot line. Oh, but it's covered. So I have more room to say, look, either maybe really below the food line, in which case I don't need shishim, or one could argue that what? Maybe it's okay if it's covered, it's as if it's below the food line, and it would be okay. So that would be an example where you could use it to be more lenient in such a scenario. In those cases, you probably would. If you know for sure it's above the food line, even though it's steam.
Also, boiling is different than steam. If the soup boils and it hits the top of the pot.
If the soup...
If it's on a flame and you're cooking it and it's bubbling.
Right.
Right? The bubbling is not steam. The bubbling is actual soup. Soup splatters. So if your cover's on, your soup is going to splatter onto the cover. That's why a lot of times you cover the soup. Well, I mean, it cooks faster and it keeps everything inside. But instead of splattering, it'll splatter onto the top. Right,
but the question is that splattering going to, if I have my milk hitting here, does that mean it's going to actually hit and combine everything together? Not necessarily, right? If it rises.
But then again, you wouldn't know. So that's in terms of.
So that's right. So you're saying if you want to find room to be leading it, you can see what the rabbi would say. The following: look, it was covered. Maybe it did hit. Maybe it did hit below the food line. Maybe there is shishim. Maybe the splattering hit when it was rising up. There's much room to be lenient in those situations, for sure. Okay, so that's the end of the splashing scenario. Again, let's just reiterate. If we want to talk about when you splash a pot, it's about below and above the food line. If it's below the food line, much more room to be lenient. You don't need 60 times the food. We say that the splash penetrates inside. It's as if it goes into the food directly. If it's above, you're most probably going to need 3,600 times that amount because it's going to affect part of the pot as well. Again, it's still possible you'll have enough to nullify it, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult inside the content, the food. Regardless, though, your pot you should kosher. The only time there's room to be lenient are in two scenarios: if it's above the food line and it's Erev Shabbos, or if you have important guests that are coming, or if the person is poor. We're going to be much more likely, we won't want the person to lose money. It's called Hesed Meruba. Usually all those three leniencies come together. Erev Shabbos, L'tzorach Orchim, not like my neighbor guest, but Doraisa guest. You should know that. There's a difference between inviting your neighbor for a meal that you're friends with, social friends, isn't a Doraisa, perhaps Oreach, to be a Doraisa Oreach, out of town, poor, won't have a Shabbos meal. Those might be Doraisa guests, right? And then, or Hefsta Meruba, if the person really has no money and it's very expensive for them to lose $5, $10, could be considered significant. In those scenarios, you could be lenient. And if the pot is covered, there are those who are lenient. If it's, again, above the food line, one should be strict. But again, there's another room here to be lenient. Maybe if it's only an issue of Rabbanan, maybe if it's the suffix where exactly it hit. Those are the things we'd have to take into consideration. But again, you'd have to kosher your pot in both of those cases. Okay? So we're going to stop there for tonight. Next week, to be continued on the next chapter.